Good morning, and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. It's time to start hardening off our onions. Onions need to start getting used to the weather, the wind, sun, and the outside temperature 6 to 8 weeks before the last frost. And here in north central Maryland, it's now 8 weeks before our last frost. So it's time to bring them upstairs and start putting them outside. Now I need to start them in a protected area. So here close to the house on the patio, that's going to be a good place. And we're only going to start by leaving them outside 2 hours today. We just have to build up slowly. And because they're only going to be outside 2 hours, I've set up some lights here in the kitchen, close to the garden. They're going to be outside for 2 hours and then back outside under these lights. Now these onion seedlings are 6 weeks old. And we potted them up only 1 month ago. So they've been in those 4-inch pots for 1 month growing. And every day we're going to increase the time they stay outside. Now the squirrels will dig in these pots, so I need to cover them and protect them. Now, if onions are exposed consistently to temperatures below 45, they're going to send up a flower head called bolting. For that reason, I don't plan to set them outside every day until it's 50 degrees. Now, every day we're going to move them closer and closer to the full sun. Closer to the garden where they'll be less protected. After about a week or two, depending on the weather, we'll plant them out into the garden. So you want to plant them out 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost. And here that'll be 6 weeks, mid-March. If you're like me and you need to protect your seedlings, I don't recommend this brand of netting. It tears really easy. It's not worth the money. There's another brand that I'll link in the description that's better. I think this one that I bought is some kind of generic product, kind of a knockoff. But let me warn you, these nets are not cheap. Now today they're going to stay out for about 2 hours, then go back in the kitchen under the lights. Later, when it's time to put them out into the garden, I am going to cover them with fleece to protect them when it gets below 50 degrees, because I don't want them sending up flower heads. Good morning, and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to pot up sweet and hot peppers. Now I've already prepared my 4-inch pots with soil. And I've left them on the heat mat to keep the soil warm. Now the soil we're using today is Pro Mix Organic Garden potting soil. It's recommended to start your pepper seeds 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost. I started these seeds 11 weeks before my last frost. These seeds were started 4 weeks ago. They germinated on a heat mat in only 7 days. So these seedlings, they're 3 weeks old, and I've already thinned them. I just want 1 plant per soil block. See, here's where I snipped out the extra seedlings. Now they did germinate with a dome. After they germinated, I pulled them off the heat mat because I needed to steal it for the okra. But they were not happy. So I bought some more heat mats and put them back on. They need that extra warmth because this furnace room hasn't been running very much because we've had a warmer than normal February. Now today it's running because it's cold outside. Can you hear it? But they've needed this extra warmth this month. Now, all of these sweet red peppers are the variety Ivarsky. I've grown these for several years, and these are grown from my own saved seeds. They're a thin-walled, about 7-inch tapered pepper. They are my favorite, and they have been my top producing pepper. Now they're going to grow inside under the lights on the heat mat for 7 more weeks. And as they get bigger and bushier, I've learned to space them apart to give them more room to grow. I want to develop big, strong plants. Now, I don't want them to fruit inside, so any flowers that appear, I'll take those off. Now the sweet peppers are done, and I have a few hot peppers. These are all my own saved seeds. So we have early jalapenos, and we have 3 red cayenne. The yellow cayenne, they didn't germinate, but that's okay. I I'm not going to sow anymore. These 5 plants will be enough. They're going to be heavy producers. Now I'm going to start hardening them off to get them used to the weather, the wind, the sun, and the temperature after our last frost. Here in north central Maryland, that means the beginning of May. And we're going to put them out into the garden 2 to 4 weeks after the last frost. So here, that's mid-May or after Mother's Day. Now always use warm water because cold water is going to cause cold shock. I've done it in the past. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to pot up Black Beauty eggplant. Now I've already prepared some 4-inch pots. And I'm using Pro Mix organic garden potting soil. I like it because it has microfungi that colonize the root system and help develop a strong, healthy plant. Now, eggplant needs to be started 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost. I started mine 11 weeks before my last frost. These seeds were started 4 weeks ago. The seeds germinated in 7 days on a heat mat covered with a humidity dome. Now, these 10 are from my own saved seeds, and I'm excited because this is the first time I have successfully saved eggplant seed. The rest of these were fresh seed that I bought. So these seedlings are 3 weeks old. Now the seeds, when they germinated, I stole their heat mat for the okra, and they were not happy. This furnace room tends to be warm in February and at the beginning of March. The furnace runs constantly, but this February, we haven't had the extreme cold temperatures like normal, and many days the furnace hasn't run, so they've required more heat. So I bought 2 more heat mats. And I'm going to leave them on the heat mat. And that's one of the reasons those pots are so crowded. I want them to stay on there. And I don't have any more heat mats, so they're going to have to share. Now, eggplant grows best from 70 to 80 degrees. And this room tends to run 65 to 75. So a little bit more heat helps. I want big, strong plants by mid-May. Now they're going to grow inside under lights for 7 more weeks. Once they get bigger and bushier, I will spread them out to give them more room to grow. So if you notice, some of the ones with bigger leaves have already blocked the light from the small ones. But they're going to do better now that they're potted up. And if they flower inside, I'll remove those. I want the energy to grow into a strong plant. We don't want any fruit right now. Now here in the Mid-Atlantic, in north central Maryland, flea beetles are a problem. They will destroy a small eggplant seedling. If the seedling's small and weak, or if you plant it out too early when it's cold, they'll just be gone. I've learned to grow bigger, stronger plants. Those can survive the flea beetles. And they'll still put pinprick holes in the leaves, but the plant itself won't die if it's big and strong. And I have to make sure and wait until it's warm enough. We're going to start hardening these off, bringing them outside several hours a day and increasing the time after the last frost, early May. And we're going to plant them out into the garden 2 to 4 weeks after the last frost. Here, that means mid-May or after Mother's Day. Now, when you water, avoid using really cold water. Here in the basement, the water comes directly from underground, and it is ice cold. So I always make sure I use warm water. Good morning, and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today, we're going to plant out onions. Onions like full sun. So we're going to plant them along this side of the garden. We get the best sun right here. Now, the onion roots are really shallow, so don't plant them real deep. You only want to plant those roots 1 inch deep. Let me show you on this Hori knife. Now, I potted up my onions, so they're in 4-inch pots. They've got a lot more soil than typically, so I went ahead and dug a trench to put them in. But if you grew your onions, bunched all together, and then you had to tease them apart, then you can use a dibber. I'll show you how later. Now, the measurement between your onions is going to depend on the variety. These first 13 are my red Italian flat cipollone. I think that's how you say it. They're only going to be about a 2-inch bulb, so I want to space them close together. We're going to put them about 2 inches apart. They're also going to be ready first. They're a faster growing variety. Now I also have some Spanish yellow sweet Utah onions, and I'm going to measure those about 3 inches apart. And we have some Walla Walla, and those are going to be spaced about 4 inches apart. So it's all going to depend on the size of the bulb. Now you can put them all really close together and then just harvest as green onions. Now, some already have some really well-developed root systems. The bigger the roots, the bigger and healthier the bulbs. That's the reason I wanted to pot them up. And I had enough space under the grow lights. I had plenty of soil. And I didn't really grow that many onions, only 70. If I was growing 300 onions, it wouldn't be possible to pot them all up. Let me show you some of the roots. Now you see the green hoops? I set these up so I can cover these with fleece because the nights coming up are going to be really cold. If onions are consistently exposed to temperatures about 45 degrees and below, they're going to send up a flower head. They're going to bolt, and I don't want that. So if the temperature dips below 50, I'm going to cover them up. So if onions flower, they're still edible. They're just not going to store well, not for several months. They'll rot. That's the reason I don't want them to send up a flower. Now we're going to start planting the Walla Walla. They're a sweet, bigger bulb. And we're going to measure them 4 inches apart. So you want to plant out your onion seedlings 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost. Here it's 6 weeks before our last frost. So it's mid-March. And we got a lot of cold days left. And again, that's the reason I've set out the hoops. Now the onions, the green leaves, the tops, they need this cool weather to grow. Now the trench is full, but I've still got one more Walla Walla left. So it's a perfect time to show you how to plant it if, you didn't pot them up, when you just have that little thin onion with the roots sticking down. Now those roots, they were too long for me to be able to use the dibber. But if your roots, are shorter than mine, you can try it with the dibber. It worked better for me to use the Hori knife. Now I said cold weather helps the tops grow. And that's important because the green tops become the solar energy collectors for growing the bulbs. The more stronger the leaves, the better. Now you'll read that onions are heavy feeders, and you want to feed them during the leaf stage. That's when they need to be fed. Now you see I've moved to the back half of the garden. And that side has enough because it gets less sun over there. So most of the onions are going to be here at the back of the garden. Now we're back to planting our red Italian flat onions 2 inches together. Now I don't plan to feed my onions because every fall I chop and drop all of my old plants and I cover everything with cardboard and then I mulch it again. That means for 11 years, I've been slowly building rich soil. There is a lot of organic matter in this garden. Plus, this area right here specifically for 4 years had quail on it. So it's got enough to feed all my plants this year. But if you want to feed your onions, there's 2 things I recommend. Put down a 1-inch layer of compost on the beds, or mix bone and blood meal, equal parts, like half a cup and half a cup. So 1 cup for 10 feet. And just dust that on top of your rows. Now, if you're feeding your onions, you want to stop when the bulbs start to form. You don't keep feeding them after that. At that point, you want them to focus on putting the energy down into the bulb. Now we're back to planting the walla 4 inches apart. Now I haven't mentioned the row spacing. How far apart to plant it from your next row of plants. Now we got some strawberries here in the front, and they're going to bush out more. And I'm going to want 12 inches between the strawberries and the onions. That's going to give them room. And 12 inches is pretty much my minimum that I would give them. You can give them more space than that. Now, if cool weather helps the leaves to grow, what causes the bulbs to form? Well, that's dependent on the hours of daylight. Now remember, there's 3 kinds of onions. There's short day, intermediate day, and long day. And here I can grow the intermediate and the long day. The red are the intermediate, and the walla and the yellow Spanish are long day. Now, the short day only require 10 hours of light to start bulbing. The intermediate day take 12 to 14 hours of daylight to start bulbing. And the long day require 14 or more hours of daylight to bulb. So if you live in the South and you're growing long day onions, they're never going to bulb up for you. That's what makes the bulbs start to grow when they hit the right number hours of daylight. Now, what are their water requirements? Onions do not like to dry out. Now, as onions mature, their water needs are going to increase. You need to water them even at the bulbing stage. Now the Walla Walla are done, and we have the sweet yellow, sweet yellow Spanish Utah onions left. And we're going to space those 3 inches apart. Now you want to stop watering them when the tops start to fall over. Now, if you come back, you're not going to see me water because I do a no-dig method of gardening. Every fall, I lay down cardboard, and that holds in the moisture. I only water strawberries if they're suffering and our blueberry bushes, but I never water my onions. Now, I will water them today. I want to make sure the roots don't get stuck in any air pockets. And I will water them for about a week until they get established. But temperatures are really going to drop. I doubt I have to water much this week. It's going to be cloudy too. Onions also don't like weeds. They're the top vegetable crop that doesn't do well with weeds. But again, sheet mulching with cardboard helps. I don't have much weeds now because I dug that trench. Weeds are going to pop up in that area, and I'll just have to make sure to keep them pulled. Now, if you notice, I haven't trimmed the tops. I learned from no-till growers that the practice of trimming the tops and trimming the roots came from commercial growers. And the issue was the tops and the roots would get tangled. It had nothing to do with bulb size. Now, he used to trim his tops. He's a small farmer and he sells vegetables. But he studied the research and he found that it can actually impact and make smaller bulbs. I found that fascinating. Remember, the bigger the leaves, the bigger the bulbs. Now, if you slice an onion and you see the rings, one ring requires one leaf. Each layer of the onion requires one leaf. So the more leaves you have, the more rings you're going to have. Now tonight, I will close the fleece because it's going to get down to 37. But for now, if I leave it, the squirrels are going to dig. So I'm going to put some netting over it to protect it. And I'll come back tonight and cover it with the fleece. It is so nice to be back in the garden. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to start hardening off our beets. Now the beets aren't used to the wind, sun, and temperature here outside. So we need to start them off in a protected area. Near the house is perfect. And because we're in an urban area, I'm going to use these nets to protect them from digging squirrels and pecking birds. And when they're not outside, we're going to keep them here in the kitchen under these grow lights because today they're just going to start off with 2 hours outside and we'll increase the time until they're out there full time. Now beets don't need to be started indoors. You can direct sow seeds in your garden 4 weeks before your last frost. And I'm going to plant these seedlings out into the garden at that same time, 4 weeks before my last frost. But because I grow in a small space, I like to start my beets in soil blocks. It gives me more control. Going to need to start hardening them off, getting used to the weather right now, 6 weeks before our last frost. Now these seedlings, they're 4 weeks old. I started them from seeds in the soil blocks 5 weeks ago. And because they grow slowly, I don't need to pot them up. Now, if beets are exposed to temperatures below 48 degrees consistently, they can bolt. send up a flower head. So every day I'm going to wait until it gets to be about 50 degrees, then I'll bring them outside. And we're going to increase the time they're outdoors every day and make sure they get closer and closer to full sun. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to harden off our red cabbage. Now we're going to want to transplant the cabbage, any head cabbage, red or green, it doesn't matter, 2 to 4 weeks before the last frost. That means we need to start hardening it off 4 to 6 weeks before our last frost. Now I want to start it hardening off in a protected area, so near the house is just perfect. Today we're only going to leave it outside for 2 hours, but every day we'll increase and give it more time and get it closer and closer to the full sun. And when it's not outside, we're going to leave it here in the kitchen under these lights. If cabbage is exposed consistently to temperatures 44 degrees or below, it can cause it to send up a flower head and bolt. So I'm going to wait every day until it gets to be 50 degrees or above before moving it outside. Now, I started these in soil blocks 5.5 weeks ago, and I potted them up 3 weeks ago. I'm not going to need all these cabbages, so I'm going to give a bunch away for free on a community shelf that we have behind the garage. After I cover these up, I'll show it to you. The net's going to protect it from the digging squirrels. They would love to hide their peanuts in there. I have some seeds I want to give away and put on the community shelf, so come on with me. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today I'm going to show you how I fixed my crooked leaning broccoli stems. Now 3 weeks ago I potted these up and they started to flop over and grow crooked. So I've been using some tags to try to prop them up, but it hasn't worked that great. So I'd add a tag and the next day they'd flop over a different way. So I'd add a second tag and they'd flop over a different way. And I felt like I was constantly chasing them to make them grow straight. So I came up with an idea. I ordered some straws. And I already had some skewers. And it worked. Now I added these last week and I waited to film it because I wanted to make sure it didn't damage the plants. But they've been growing nice and healthy. They look good. And it was so simple. Let me show you how I did it. These are just your basic kitchen skewers. And you want to look for jumbo or smoothie straws because you want them to be nice and thick, not the thin type. And I saved 2 broccoli plants to show you how to do it. Now first, you're going to want to trim off these baby leaves. You can also pinch them off. I'm going to cut this one off because it's broken. Then you want to measure the straw. Cut a slit. And carefully wrap it around the stem. Now, originally I envisioned pushing the stem down into the soil, but it didn't work. The roots are just too thick. So I'm going to use a skewer to support it. And if your skewer goes in a little crooked, just pull it out and put it back in again. And the leaves are tilted, but they'll straighten up later on. And it was so simple. It's just so easy. See how the leaves have straightened up? Those will do the same thing. And because the straw is slit, as the stem grows thicker, the straw will expand and it won't damage the stem. Now, when I fixed these other ones, they were much thinner. But the stems have thickened up because I wanted to save a few to show you. And this will work with many varieties of seedlings. I used it on my okra. Now, when I plant them out in the garden, will they stand up straight without the straws? I suspect they will, but come back and check. Welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today, we're going to pinch back our snapdragons for a second time. We've already pinched them back once. Now I'm going to be using these embroidery scissors. And 12 days ago, we cut out the middle of the plant where the leaves meet a growth node. Let me show you. We cut out the center and it sent out 2 branches. And today we're going to cut the center out of those branches where there's some new growth nodes. Now, why are we doing this? Because they tend to grow tall and leggy, and when they flower, they fall over. But I want them to bush out and have a fuller flowering experience. Now, you can take these cuttings and dip them in rooting powder and propagate them. And I did that the first time, and let me show you the results. So 12 days ago, in those 6-cell trays, I propagated the cuttings, and those have done best. But I had a few empty 4-inch pots like this, and the cuttings I put into those, well, they've struggled. And I think it's because the soil stayed wetter and it was colder. I did use rooting hormone powder, and several in the big pots died, like this one. Now, as you can see, it was developing roots. But again, I think it just was too cold and wet. So if you're going to propagate them, use a smaller cell. Now, these seedlings are 6 weeks old. Now, these were thinned and potted up 4 weeks ago. And they're going to continue to grow here in the basement under the lights only 1 more week. So I'm going to start hardening them off 4 weeks before our last frost. Here, that's early April. And we're going to plant them out into our green stalk vertical garden 2 weeks before our last frost, mid-April. Now, I feel like some aren't ready. I'm going to wait a little bit longer. Let me show you those. And of course, the newly rooted propagated seedlings I'm not going to trim. Some of them actually need pruning, pinching back for the first time. So don't prune them back above the very first set of baby leaves. Go up to the first set of true leaves. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to pinch back our petunias. Now you can just use your fingers to pinch them back, but I'm going to use these embroidery scissors. And we want to cut out the center growth. And this is going to cause it to bush out, making a fuller plant. I went ahead and pinched one back 10 days ago. Now let me show you what happens if it hasn't been pinched back in the center. It grows tall and leggy and it'll flop over. Now if you feel like that's a waste, you can trim off the lower leaves and dip this in rooting powder, or put it in some water and grow a new plant. But honestly, this grow room is full. I don't have any more space. Now it's going to give you more flowers, make it more lush by cutting out the center. Now when you buy petunia plants, the greenhouse has already done this for you. Now I have a variety of sizes because I had to sow seeds a second time. The biggest ones are 6 weeks old and the smallest are 4. And I feel the in-between size at about 5 weeks, that's the right time to pinch them back. Now they were all potted up 10 days ago. I started these seedlings 7 weeks ago in 2-inch soil blocks. Now, most information I found about pruning petunias was about the plants, not the seedlings. That was hard information to find. And that's because most people buy them as plants. And that's why I went ahead and tested out on one of the seedlings before I made this video for you. Now, these are a summer flower. So they're going to continue to grow inside here in the basement under light 5 to 6 more weeks. and we'll start hardening them off after our last frost. And I'll pinch them back several times before then. Now I'm going to plant these into our green stalk vertical garden 2 weeks after our last frost. Here, that's after Mother's Day, mid-May. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to pinch back our stevia seedlings. Now you can use your fingers, but I'm going to use these embroidery scissors. And because most people buy their stevia as plants instead of starting them from seeds, it was hard to find information about pinching back seedlings. Now I do know I want to cut it above the growth node, above the first set of true leaves. But because they're growing so slowly, I'm going to do an experiment and cut them at a variety of heights and see what the results are. Now the tallest seedlings are 6 weeks old, but it required 21 days for them all to germinate. Big or small, they were all potted up 10 days ago. Now, I found that I did pinch one back several days ago, and let me show you. I cut it out in the center, and it sent up 2 new shoots. So I think above the second set of leaves is the right place, because the first set of true leaves are right there on the soil. So I think going up to the second set is a better option. That's what I'm going to do with the rest of them. Now if you feel like this is a waste, you can try trimming off the lower leaves, dipping it in rooting hormone, or putting it in water, and maybe you can grow a new plant. But my grow room's full. I don't have the space, but maybe I'll try that next year. Now these seeds were sown 7 weeks ago in 2-inch soil blocks, and they grow very slowly. Most of the plants you buy are grown from cuttings, not seeds. Now frost will kill stevia. So these are going to keep growing here in the basement under lights for 5 to 6 more weeks. I'm going to start hardening them off, getting them used to the weather after our last frost. Here, that's the beginning of May. Now this baby one, I'm not going to pinch this one back today. It was the last to germinate. Now we're going to plant these in the garden 2 weeks after the last frost. Here, That's mid-May or after Mother's Day. Good morning and welcome back to Withrow Urban Homestead. Today we're going to plant out our beets. The spring vegetables do best along this side of the garden because in the summer these blackberry canes leaf out and protect the crops from the worst of the summer sun. They stay cool longer on this side. Now this netting is protecting the cabbages from the white cabbage butterflies from laying their eggs and the caterpillars just destroying them, but it's also going to protect the beets from digging squirrels. But first, let's get this open. Now I want to leave 12 inches between the cabbage and the first beet, and then 4 inches from the edge. Now this strip along here, it's pretty loose because this fall and winter I was growing greens and lettuce. So there's not much cardboard left. But let's go ahead and clean it up before we get started. Now we also want to move away the mulch. After the beets are established, we'll put the mulch back. And last, I want to loosen the soil and make sure there's no landscape pins still in there. The cardboard from the fall of 2022, it's already broken down into soil, but its landscape pins are still down there. So let's loosen this up on the surface. Now the beet seedlings are 5 weeks old. Now I've already thinned them down to 1 plant per soil block. Because growing in soil blocks, if more than one come up, the roots can get tangled. So I prefer just 1 for each block. And I started hardening these off last week. Now you don't need to start your beet seeds indoors. You can direct sow the seeds in the ground 4 weeks before your last frost. And that's what that is today. Right now it's 4 weeks before my last frost. Because I grow in a small space, I like to start my beets indoors. It gives me more control. Now remember, beet seeds are actually a fruit that contain 1 to 5 seeds. Now, some people don't thin their beets. They let 1, 2, or even 3 beets come up together. But no-till growers said, be careful, because if your goal is to collect them as they mature, pull the biggest beet and leave the others to bulb up. If you started them in soil blocks, the ones you leave aren't going to get any bigger because the roots have gotten intertwined. But if you direct sow your seeds in the soil and let more than one grow together, you can harvest one at a time because the others will still keep growing since their roots have had more room to spread out. If you want to learn more from an expert who grows and sells produce, No-Till Growers is a rich source of information. I'm going to link their beets video in the description, but they have great videos on other topics. These are heirloom Detroit dark red beets that I bought from Botanical Interests. They also have some great growing information. Check out their growing guides. I'll put a link in the description too. Now this is my main crop of beets. Most of these I'm going to shred, dehydrate, then turn into beet powder. It can be used in smoothies, or my favorite way, fill gelatin capsules. I take 12 every day. It's like my natural vitamins, because honestly, I'm not that crazy about beets. Now some of these beets I'm going to use for dill salads. And after I harvest them, they'll last for months in the refrigerator in a baggie. Now I left several beets in the soil through the winter. I sowed them in the fall, and I covered them if the temperatures went below 25 degrees. I also mounted some soil on top to protect them. Now they're starting to grow again. My hope is they'll send up a flower head and I can save my own seeds for the first time. Beets require 2 seasons to send up that flower. Now, if you have a big garden and enough space, you can space your rows 12 inches apart. But I don't have that kind of space. So I'm going to stagger the next row in between the beets 4 inches away. I'll also grow a fall crop of beets. Now, because I chop and drop my plants every fall and leave the old mulch, and I cover it all with cardboard and then new mulch, all that underneath the cardboard is already broken down into rich soil. And that's the reason I don't have to water. I rarely water in the summer because it holds in the moisture. Now I will water today and for about a week while the roots get established. I also don't feed the garden because all that soil is already rich. And beets don't require a lot of feeding. They're not heavy feeders like onions. Wrong sign, they're not a person. But the point is, they're not heavy feeders. Now, because spring beets can bolt if they're exposed to temperatures below 44 degrees consistently, tonight I will cover them with fleece. It's still cold here at nights. Now, when it's above 50 degrees during the day, I'll open the fleece, but we're going to leave the net in place because we don't want the squirrels digging them up. So I was able to plant 3 rows and a few in front of the cabbages, and those are the ones I'll harvest first. Thank you for visiting Withrow Urban Homestead. See you later. Bye-bye.